Welcome into another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. We have a Stay Wolk UGA recruiting show edition with Jordan Hill. For those of you that were watching at the very, very beginning of this, you'll realize that I'm still not the most technically savvy person because I cut into the live stream before we actually jumped into the show. Just classic Stay Wolk UGA recruiting show stuff. You can live to expect plenty more of that, but we have not been canceled as a show yet. I don't even know who would cancel us as a show if we were to get canceled, but we have not been canceled yet. So we are back for another edition. Jordan, how do you feel like things went the last time?
I thought it went great, Ben. I really didn't know what to expect, and the feedback, I thought most of what I saw was positive. Shout out to one of the people on YouTube that said, you guys should be in a studio. And we'll drop a GoFundMe in here to get us a studio before episode 3. But no, I thought it was great. I've heard nothing but good things and excited to get episode 2 rolling.
Yeah, I saw a lot of the studio feedback. I also saw some of the feedback about the Dogs 24/7 ad space that we're filling up here. It's like, look, these are all constructive criticisms that we will take in. One day they might give us a studio and we'll be able to do it from a studio as well. I think we've got a great show in store for today. We've got some news items as always. We'll talk some Junior Day. We'll talk some rankings update. There was a big update to the top 24/7 Sports recruiting rankings earlier this week. And then we have also got an interview in the middle of the show with Georgia tight end commit Lincoln Keys. We went for about 20 minutes. I think you're really going to enjoy what he had to say about Georgia, why he ended up there, what led him to that, just some of the things that have been happening behind the scenes in his recruitment. So I said this on the last show. It's always important for us to be able to have some kind of interview during the course of these recruiting episodes, just so you get a little bit different voice than Jordan and I. And then as always, we'll have Predict a Commit and other segments that we'll do at arrow pointing up, things like that after the interview as well. I said, Jordan, I did ask you how we felt like things went last time. I'm asking, give me a star rating, 1 through 5. How did we feel like we did last time?
I mean, I think I'm a little biased. I would give us 5 stars. You know, I think that there wasn't really, other than like one screen share that kind of went awry. I thought it went pretty well, and I mean, we got to give the shout out again to Talon Taylor. I mean, you know, without him, probably 3, maybe a 4-star. But I thought having him and like you've done with these episodes and the ones to come, Ben, I think centering them around these interviews. I mean, if I'm a Georgia fan, if I'm someone who follows recruiting, that's what I'm here for as much as anything, is to hear from these guys, to hear from a lot of guys that are going to be future Dogs. You know, again, I am speaking as someone who's biased, but I give us 5 stars. What did you think? How did you think the first one went?
Well, I sort of agree, not to take a subtle jab, which is probably unfair, but Wayne Mungus in the comments said was it an ESPN 5-star episode? I think it was maybe more of an ESPN 5-star than a 24/7 5-star episode, but that's just me shooting for the best. You're being too hard on yourself though. The huddle highlight clip snafu, that's what we live for on this show. That makes this show more organic, the type of show that we want it to be. But let's dive into some of the news items of this episode. We have some debrief to do from the first Junior Day on January 18th. We will look ahead to the second Junior Day, which is coming up this upcoming weekend on Saturday, February 1st. But I want to start with the first Junior Day and kind of what my main takeaways were from that event. And I mean, what I will say, and I said this on the lead up show, like the big thing with these Junior Days is there's a high likelihood that names that are on this list, whether it be the last one or this one, are going to wind up in Georgia's recruiting class. It might not happen right now. They might not be making decisions, today. But when you're talking about guys getting spring practice visits scheduled, official visits scheduled, making decisions in June and July, I think that there is a high probability that names that we bring up during the course of this show will be mentioned again on subsequent shows later on in the year. The position group that I'm going to start with is running back. We talked about Carson Baker, Jay Lamar, Javian Osborne. Those are 3 names that were on campus. There will be more this upcoming weekend. But Carson Baker and Jay Lamar are 2 in-state running backs that I've gotten the chance to speak with, and they are very high on Georgia. I think that in some cases it's a matter of Georgia figuring out which running backs they want to prioritize in this signing class. I mean, there's some out-of-state guys that we'll talk about coming up this weekend. There are some guys like Xavier Crowell, who has not been mentioned as a running back on this, that has an official visit scheduled to Georgia. He's another out-of-state guy. But I'm really looking at Carson Baker and Jay Lamar because just something tells me one of those two in-state guys will end up at Georgia. I'm not guaranteeing it. I'm not even picking either one of them yet for my predict to commit. I can't speak for you. You might be different. But I think that there is a strong possibility there. So Georgia has to upgrade at the running back position. They only signed one last cycle. They ended up having an early departure in the transfer portal. Like, they are going to emphasize the running back position with either 2 or 3 in this signing class. There's no doubt to me about that. Looking at the wide receiver position, Vance Spafford was the one commit that was on campus last weekend or 2 weekends ago. I think that there is a great opportunity for Georgia to hold on to him. I will also note this, and we talked with Lincoln Keys about this in our interview too. Mark Bowman is a tight end from the West Coast that reclassified during from the 2027 class to the 2026 class. I know that those two are very close. They're both pretty close with Lincoln Keys. They're all going to be playing 7-on-7 together. Teams are going to be coming after Vance Spafford. He's a fast, shifty wide receiver that can play the slot. He's probably going to take a visit to USC this upcoming weekend. He's going to get offers from other places, likely take visits to other places as well. But Georgia feels pretty strongly about holding on to him. Davion Brown, Ryan Mosley, Kayvon Concierto were a couple of guys, few guys that I connected with that I think all will schedule official visits with Georgia at some point. And that really, to set the stage properly for when we're talking about Junior Day, like, it's really who are the guys that are going to come to Georgia now and also schedule official visits in the summer? Because if you combine those two things, there's just a really high chance that they're going to end up at Georgia. And I think all of those wide receivers, there's a strong possibility with. And then the offensive line was a big spot for them last weekend as well. Desmond Green is a name that I almost made my predict to commit last time. We'll see what happens later on in this show, but he's someone that I think Georgia is super, super high on. Kirby Smart went to go see him earlier this week, but I know that visit was a successful one, and I feel like Georgia is probably the team to beat for Desmond Green. Jared Smith got some time with Kirby Smart during the basketball game. Graham Houston from Buford, someone that I know Georgia really, really likes. So I'm curious for you, Jordan, out of all of those names that I just mentioned on the offensive side of the ball, is there anyone in particular that intrigues you the most?
I think I just kind of have to do it collectively, and it's just what happens with the running back position as you laid out. It's sort of, to me, looking at it as a continuation to what happened with the 2025 class. There were points in the making of that class and over the course of that cycle where we were saying, is Georgia going to sign 3 running backs? Are they going to get Bo Walker, Usmane Kroma, maybe Marshall, maybe, some of these other guys that kind of got in the mix, and then the dust settles and Usmane goes to Florida State and Georgia does hold on to Bo Walker, which I think is worthwhile. But no, it's going to be in this cycle, especially these next few months, following these running backs, seeing guys like Crowell that, I truthfully hadn't really heard much about except in recent weeks. It's going to just be fascinating to see what they do. It's a clear need for them in this class, but who do they prioritize? Who do they really like? And I know that'll be part of the conversation too with this upcoming Junior Day, but just what they do at running back to me is maybe the most fascinating part of the 2026 cycle for Georgia.
I'll keep running through some of that January 18th Junior Day, just like recapturing who was in attendance and then calling out some of the things that stood out to me from that. Bryce Perry-Wright, another guy from Buford on the defensive line that Georgia continues to recruit. Clemson is a team that I think is really competitive there. Kamari Brooks from nearby North Oconee High School played high school football with Landon Roldan. He's an edge rusher that could probably play a little linebacker, play a little bit of edge rusher. I think Georgia likes him as an outside linebacker. He was one of the guys that got one-on-one time with Kirby Smart during the basketball game as well, which is always something that you keep an eye on. Dre Quinn is another outside linebacker that Kirby Smart dropped the helicopter to go see yesterday over at Greater Atlanta Christian High School. You cannot talk about Georgia and Junior Days and anything without talking about 5-star linebacker Tyler Atkinson from Grayson High School. He was the very first person whose family got to go down and sit with Kirby Smart during that basketball game. Also, just not the first basketball game that Tyler Atkinson has gotten to attend. I know that I was at one in the past, about a year and a half ago now, maybe 2 years ago now. It was a while ago, where he was by himself with Glenn Schumann, with Kirby Smart. He was the only recruit that was up on a random Tuesday afternoon visit. So you don't have to look very far or be deep in the weeds of recruiting to realize that Tyler Atkinson is one of the top priorities for Georgia, but he's going to be a top priority for a lot of big time programs. And that's going to turn out to be a super competitive recruitment. A couple guys at defensive back that I did get a chance to talk to after their visit: Chauncey Kennan, number 1 cornerback from Virginia. He is a long, physical cornerback, exactly what Georgia looks for at that position. He does have an official visit to Georgia scheduled already. And then I'll also bring up Jordan Edmonds. He's from Sprayberry High School in the Atlanta area. I know that Alabama's recruiting him really hard. He'll be there this weekend. He was just at Florida this past weekend, but Georgia coaches went to go see him and his high school teammate Keelan Jones go play basketball earlier this week. Jordan Edmonds, again, another 6'2", long, rangy, athletic cornerback. Like, Georgia is clearly looking for a prototype at DB this cycle, at cornerback especially, and they just want length and athleticism. So I will ask you again, Jordan, out of that defensive group, who stands out?
Oh, it's got to be Tyler Atkinson, and I'll go ahead and tease. I might bring him back up later in today's episode. But no, I mean, you look at that talent and that skill level and the connection to Georgia. You know, I'm someone in my job covering more of the team. You know, sometimes I'm late on hearing about guys, and guys kind of pop up, but this is a name I feel like I've known virtually since I came back on the Georgia beat. Tyler Atkinson has been a guy that has been in the recruiting circles, and has been a guy that Georgia has been connected to for quite a while. So for him to be there, I think that's notable. He's a guy that, like you said, I mean, I think this is going to be a heck of a recruitment, and one that, is going to be super competitive. But, I've learned with Glenn Schumann and Kirby Smart and those guys, if they want a linebacker, more often than not, they get them. They don't always get them. I think about Owen Papo that we saw at Auburn. He's a great example of a guy that I think Georgia valued quite a bit, and he winds up going to Auburn instead. But, Tyler Atkinson feels like a big-time target for Georgia in this class, and one of the real priorities this time around.
No doubt about it. Well, if that junior day was loaded, this junior day is going to be loaded. It's just the nature of this time of year. Georgia coaches have been heavy on the road, going to see recruits, get guys that they already knew were going to be on this junior day, but also maybe try and make some last-minute adjustments and convince other guys to go on junior days, or stop other programs from being able to change their guys' mind and get their schedules rearranged. And so what I'm going to do is, we have over at Dogs 24/7, you can subscribe, you can check out what we have as the visitors list right now. We will probably add some VIP updates between now and Saturday with a couple of additional prospects that we're expecting in attendance. As always, on Saturday, we will have a full visitors list of who we're expecting in attendance for that event. But what I'm going to do, Jordan, is I'm going to go position by position here, and I'll probably take some pauses at spots where I feel like we should talk a little bit more about those position groups. But we're going to start at quarterback and work our way to the defensive side of the ball. And so starting at quarterback, it's going to be 2 2027 quarterbacks. And I think it's very obvious that Georgia is already looking ahead to the 2027 class. They still have a lot of work to do in 2026. They don't know who their 2026 quarterback is going to be. They're trying to get Jared Curtis. When he makes his decision, it is going to have a domino effect on all of the other quarterbacks that Georgia is recruiting. Right now, I would probably predict Georgia to land a commitment other than Jared Curtis at quarterback, but that's just a gut instinct. That's not based on any, immediate intel or anything that I know is going to be happening imminently. It's just the way that I feel like things are trending with that one. But Peyton Houston is from Louisiana. So anytime you're getting an out-of-state quarterback on campus, it's going to raise the eyebrows. It's going to make you say, what's making that guy want to come to this visit specifically? So we'll see what we hear more on Peyton Houston coming out of this visit. And then J.C. Johnson is down from Lowndes County, just picked up an offer from Georgia earlier this month when Kirby Smart went down there to see him. I've been hearing about J.C. Johnson now over the last year plus. So real deal. I think that people love his ability someone that without question is going to be a major player for Georgia recruiting in the 2027 class. And as we know, quarterback recruiting just operates on a different timeline and schedule. It's just different. Quarterback recruiting, it operates entirely differently than every other position group. And so you can never say it's too early to get this guy or too late to get this guy or whatever. It's just quarterback recruiting is different. So anytime you're getting 2027s on campus, it's worth watching. But at running back, again, we talked about running back from the last junior day. I think we're going to be talking about it all cycle long until Georgia really secures what it's looking for at running back this cycle. But the two names, when you're talking about Georgia recruiting in the 2026 class, I think that two names always rise to the top. Like, I think whenever you're asking anybody in the Georgia world, who does Georgia want at running back, these two names are going to come up. You've got Savion Hyder, who's the number one running back in the country. And you've got Derek Cooper, who was committed to Georgia for about 24 hours and is the number 4 athlete in the country. Both of them ranked inside the top 30 overall in the 24/7 Sports rankings. Both of them, I think they bring slightly different games, but Savion Hyder, hard-nosed, downhill, vicious runner. Derek Cooper can play defensive back, really great pass catcher out of the backfield, great runner as well. We've talked about both of these guys. I know that you mentioned Derek Cooper as your predicted commit last episode, but it's critical for Georgia, I think, to be able to close down one of these two guys in this class.
Yeah, I think that's got to be one of the pillars in this class, along with a guy like Tyler Atkinson, as we mentioned, and whatever they decide to do at quarterback. And a reminder for the folks who read on Dogs 24/7, Savion Hyder, that last name gives a lot of people trouble, but no, I mean, very gifted back. If Georgia's able to get him, that'll be huge. As you mentioned, Derek Cooper was a guy that I had as my predicted commit in the first episode. Another guy that, any of these top backs are going to be highly coveted and are going to be guys that, the top programs in the country want, and the top programs in the country are going to go after. So by no means, I like sort of looking at our predicted commit as a little different than like a crystal ball, because so much can happen. But we know that running back's a priority. So to get these guys back on campus, the big thing for a school like Georgia with these junior days, get them on campus, try to, strengthen those relationships, try to build towards something that, maybe by the time we're talking about May, June, July, you might see some of these guys who were on campus in January committing and announcing that they're going to be Bulldogs.
Yeah, good call out on a Hyder versus whatever you might think that it is when you read it. I will say I have talked with Savion about this because I like to get pronunciations of names right, and he even called it out. He was like, I know when people read it, what people think that it is. So Savion Hyder, get it right, and try your best to not be on the Junkyard making those type of jokes either as well. All right, a couple other guys on the offensive side of the ball. At wide receiver, Deion Thomas, big body from Westlake High School, where Georgia just signed Juan Gaston. We'll talk about him a little bit more later in the show because there's a big update there. Brandon Bennett is a wide receiver from American Heritage down in South Florida. His quarterback, Diabell, who's committed to Texas, actually just picked up a Georgia offer. Really talented wide receiver, plays some defensive back as well. I actually initially had him included on my defensive back list because I thought there was a chance that Georgia was recruiting him there. I think they like him at both receiver thing right now. And then Denarius Gray is committed to Auburn right now, has been committed to Auburn, I think, since the beginning of 2024. So it's been a little while. He just recently added a Georgia offer, and he'll be back this weekend. And when I say back this weekend, I don't actually know how many times he's visited Georgia, so this will be an important look for him. We mentioned last episode, and when I was talking about the last junior day, some offensive linemen that we probably haven't talked about quite enough. Desmond Green was one of them. Graham Houston was one of them. Like, Georgia feels a lot stronger about some of these offensive linemen than they maybe show up in the recruiting rankings right now. And keep in mind, our scouting team just finished up the 2025 cycle yesterday. So all attention is being put on 2026. There's going to be plenty of updates throughout the year, and where guys are slotted right now is not where they're going to be slotted 3, 5, 6, 8, 10 months from now. Like, that's all going to get itself worked out. But one name that's going to be on campus this weekend is Malcolm Gaston. He's someone that he's like Desmond Green. I kept seeing his name pop up on visit lists over and over and over again. And I'm saying, man, there must be something here. One, his name stands out because Georgia just signed Juan Gaston. There is no relation between the two of them. But when I saw the name, it made me think. And so I started to dig into him a little bit more, and he keeps coming back. I think he's in the process of getting closer to narrowing things down. I don't know if that will mean a top 3 or a commitment. I think that some of those things will be dependent on how conversations go with Georgia this weekend and just how this overall visit goes this weekend. But someone that I think is closer to decision mode than some people would think as well. Defensive line is going to be huge this cycle, and I'll be the first to admit I'm still in the process of figuring out that board. I mean, I mentioned Bryce Perry-Wright, Ernest Rankins on the last junior day as in-state guys. Carter Lucky, that's a name that I think everybody will be familiar with, the younger brother of Lawson Lucky, big-time defensive lineman from Norcross High School. He will be back in town. He already has an official visit scheduled to Georgia. I want to say May 30th, but don't count me on that date. I'll get that corrected on Dogs 24/7 at some point. But he's another in-state defensive lineman that Georgia feels really positively about. But I'm really looking at 2 out-of-state guys at defensive line this cycle. You've got Kendall Guerville and James Johnson, both versatility plays at defensive line. I believe both of them are from Florida. James Johnson in particular is from the North Fort Myers area. I think one might go to North Fort Myers and one goes to Fort Myers. But again, for the second time in 1 minute, I'm going to ask you not to fact check me on that until I have a chance to do that for myself. But because of the fact that Georgia only signed 2 defensive linemen last cycle, we just saw Georgia take a swing at a defensive lineman in the portal and not hit. There is going to be an emphasis on numbers and depth on the defensive line in the 2026 class, getting some guys on campus this weekend. But I'm curious what you think, Jordan. You know how important the defensive line is. How you feeling about where Georgia stands from a recruiting standpoint right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those top priorities, and I think it's one where, even when you look solely to 2025 on the football field, defensive line is such a huge area of, frankly, concern with Georgia because of what they lost. But yeah, listening to those names and following the guys who have visited both a few weeks ago and then going to be visiting this weekend, I mean, I can't help but really pay attention to Carter Lucky. I mean, obviously that family connection makes sense with Lawson, but I think he's a heck of a prospect in his own right, and his offer list shows that. So I'm always one, Ben, to really kind of pull for those younger brothers because his whole life, especially in the last few years, it's like, hey, yeah, you're Lawson's brother. I think those guys got a little extra, and I'm sure, for a while there when they were younger, I bet Lawson was pushing Carter around, and I don't think he's pushing Carter around anymore, if I had to guess.
Yeah, look, they were blessed with football DNA, both of them, but tight ends and defensive linemen, I'm going to give the edge to the defensive linemen whenever they're shoving each other around a little bit. All right, continuing on through the defensive side of the ball. Pronunciations are important to me, Jordan, and I hate that I'm going to butcher this one, but Ebenezer Ewatade, he's from North Carolina, goes to the same high school that Nnamdi Agboko went to. Nnamdi Agboko's younger brother, Akene Agboko, is also a Georgia recruit. Georgia coaches went to go see both of them a couple times throughout the last month. I know that Ebenezer is a guy that I didn't know a whole bunch about before this month started. Georgia really likes this kid. It's similar to last cycle. Like Darren Akinigbon was a name that I was not familiar with when we got into January. And by the time February got around, it was like, wait, Georgia's the leader for this guy. And I would almost be surprised if he doesn't end up signing with Georgia. I'm not there yet with Ebenezer just because he hasn't taken his junior day visit. I haven't had as many chances to connect and interact with him to say for sure. But whenever Georgia really, really wants a guy that you don't know a ton about, there's usually something to that. Linebacker Isaiah Williams, previously committed to Florida State. He visited Georgia during the season when he was still committed to Florida State. I know Glenn Schumann likes him a lot and someone that I think will probably take an official visit to Georgia at some point. And then Braden Rouse, he goes to Kell High School. I wrote about him earlier this week at Dogs 24/7. His chemistry teacher at Kell High School is Kirby Smart's sister. So Braden is very familiar with Kirby's niece. His nephew plays high school football. Brock Burris plays high school football at Kell, already has a USF offer, Charlotte offer. I got a chance to meet with Brock last week as well. But there is familiarity there with Kirby Smart and Braden Rouse. Kirby Smart, Glenn Schumann went to go see him play basketball. Kirby Smart dropped the helicopter over at Kell High School. He picked up an offer this month. And I'll say this, there are certain guys, when you go see them in person, you can watch film, you can ask coaches or parents or trainers or whatever and get insights into kids. But there are times where you go see someone and what they look like and how they interact with you makes you just be like, man, this guy feels like a big time player. Like it just feels like he is one of those types of dudes. And that was the sense that I got when I went to go see Braden. Like he walks in and says, all right, that's an SEC inside linebacker. Like it screams it. The frame screams it. His demeanor screams it. I mean, he's a smart kid. Like his dad's a coach at the school. And I had to wait a little bit to talk to him because he's in AP stats. And his dad was like, I'm not getting him out of AP stats. I'm sorry. It's just the way it's going to be. Stanford is coming to see him later today. I can't in good faith pull him out of AP stats to do an interview. And I said, that's totally fine. That makes sense by me. Good dad move, good coach move. I would recommend the exact same thing. But just everything about this guy makes me think he's going to be a big time player. And I think that that's why you've seen Tennessee has gone all in on him. Like they brought an entire coaching staff out to see him. He took a junior day up there at the beginning of the month. Georgia Tech has really prioritized this guy. He went on a junior day last weekend to Georgia Tech as well. And now he'll be at Georgia this upcoming weekend. Sort of reminds me of Christian Gass's recruitment last cycle, which might not be what Georgia folks want to hear because Christian Gass ends up signing with Tennessee. But someone that Georgia gives a January offer to, Tennessee has already done a pretty good job recruiting him, but Georgia is going to go to the end with this guy. And so we've talked about Tyler Atkinson. We've talked about Xavier Griffin committed to USC. Like there are other in-state linebackers that Georgia really likes, but I think that Braden Rouse has to be mentioned when we're talking about those in-state linebackers. And he's someone that I'm really, really high on. I know you might have, you don't have to tell me if you didn't read my article, but anything stand out to you from my conversation with Braden Rouse earlier this week?
Oh, I think just what you were talking about with the AP stats. I was going to ask you, did you take AP stats? Did you take any AP math classes back at Peachtree Ridge?
Look, Peachtree Ridge was a great academic institution. They encouraged us from a young age to get into AP classes. I'm not patting myself on the back, sitting here acting like I'm some smart guy because you know better than anyone, I don't even know how to start a stream without doing the countdown clock beforehand. So you know I'm not a smart guy. But I did take AP classes, and credit to Peachtree Ridge High School for helping us out academically.
Did not take AP stats, though. I think it was offered. I took AP Calc and did well enough on the AP test that I never took a math class in college. And you know what? That was good enough for this journalist.
Yeah, well, I'm the type of guy who says, like, we're talking about recruiting and a guy takes a visit somewhere else. And I hate that I overuse this phrase, but I do it all the time. I say, well, that changes the math on this, or that changes the calculus on this. And that's about the extent of my use of math in this day and age. So I'll wrap up here on the defensive side of the ball for this February 1st junior day. This is going to be a good group at defensive back. I think that Georgia they rearranged a couple of schedules to get guys on campus for this junior day at defensive back. So Dorian Barney, Nasir McCoy, Tyreek Green, Jordan Smith, Peyton Dyer, and Tony Forney. Those are 6 in-state defensive backs from Carrollton High School, Beaufort High School, Houston County High School, Duluth High School, and Kell High School that Georgia really, really likes. They've gone to see all of them at certain points throughout the course of January. The 2 out-of-state defensive backs that I'm going to take a look at here. Jira Edwards, do me a favor while I'm talking through this. Look up Jira Edwards, where we have him ranked. I think we might have him as the number 1 safety in the country. But either way, a highly recruited safety for Georgia in the 2026 recruiting class. Much like with quarterbacks in the 2027 class that are coming out of state on junior days, if you're an out-of-state prospect coming on a junior day, it is going to catch my attention more than an in-state guy coming on a junior day. Jira Edwards is definitely one of the guys on that list. All right, Jordan, what do we got from a ranking standpoint?
24/7 Sports has Edwards as the 3rd overall safety in the 2026 cycle.
All right, number 3 safety. So highly touted, someone that Georgia is going to recruit until the end. I think he has an official visit to Georgia scheduled, but I don't want you to quote me on the date yet, so I'm not going to give out a date, but I will at some point over at Dogs 24/7. But one name at defensive back that I find fascinating, and I don't know that there's anything to this, but South Florida, Northwestern High School, I think that's where Teddy Bridgewater was the head coach this past season. Javari Flowers is a defensive back. He was in the 2026 class. He's been scheduled to be on this junior day now for a couple of weeks. He just announced yesterday that he's reclassifying from the 2026 class to the 2025 class. So he's not going to sign next week during that standard national signing day, but he is likely going to sign with someone at some point in the spring. And Georgia's getting a visit. He told me this morning he's still taking that junior day visit to Georgia, despite the fact that he reclassified, which tells me that Georgia knew that that was something that was probably going to be happening. And that's what led Georgia to offer him earlier this month. I don't have enough info yet to be able to say how serious things are between Javari Flowers and Georgia, but he's going to be on campus at Georgia for his first visit after reclassifying. So it's certainly not nothing. And I think that that's just something to keep a really close eye on here over the next couple of weeks.
Just wanted to shout out, talking about those DBs, you said Nasir McCoy, and I was like, why do I remember that name? And one, I think I remember when he got a Georgia offer when Georgia kind of first reached out. But then I looked at his Twitter and I said, oh, I remember why. So his name is Nasir McCoy. He's got as his nickname NASCAR. That'll
always catch Jordan Hill's attention right there. You nickname yourself NASCAR, Jordan Hill's going to know about you. All right. Any other thoughts from you on Junior Day before we start to talk some ranking stuff?
No, I mean, I think the biggest thing, I always enjoy this time of year, and I thought, Ben, you did such a good job during the first Junior Day, because it was at a basketball game, of seeing who kind of got that one-on-one attention with Kirby, with Glenn Schumann, with some of those other people. But then being able to circle back to those Junior Days, again, like I mentioned earlier, when we're in June, July, August, when kids start committing, I just, it's not always one-to-one of like, oh, this guy was here and he winds up coming to Georgia. But I think sometimes you get good insight on what Georgia thinks of some of these guys, the priorities among the guys who visited. And I think that a lot of the time it winds up paying off for the Bulldogs.
Absolutely. All right. Yesterday was a big day for the 24/7 Sports scouting team. They do a super thorough job. And I'll just tease this ahead of next week's episode. I typically don't do this because you never know 100% if interviews are going to work out the way that you want them to. But because this is an in-network one, I think that it's safe for me to do it. We are going to have on next week as our guest the director of scouting, Andrew Ivins. Him and his team do an incredible job just tackling what is an impossible role. Like, they do an unbelievably accurate job of getting things right, both on an individual basis and on a broader scale basis. And when it comes to rankings, we'll talk more with Andrew about that next week. I think it should be a really fun conversation, just because I'm like you guys. I like to give the ranking guys hell sometimes too when I disagree on my takes. And I'm looking forward to being able to say that to Andrew and having him, if you know anything about Andrew, he's going to have no problem putting me in my place and telling me why I'm the big dumb idiot in the room, which is accurate. So this most recent rankings that they came out with, I thought that there were a few notable takeaways, but the most notable takeaway of them all was the update to Juan Gaston. So Juan Gaston signs with Georgia out of Westlake High School, was already a top 150 recruit for Georgia. But as they have gone through and looked at his senior film, they got the access to him down in Orlando for the Under Armour All-American game that was down there. I started to get some feedback over the last few weeks from them, like, hey, what are your thoughts on Juan Gaston? Is there anything that we're missing here? Because they started to feel really, really strongly about Gaston as a prospect. And I mentioned it in my arrow pointing up. If you listen to these shows religiously, I promise you, it may not always be in the news segment, but we will drop some tidbits here or there throughout on things that we're expecting to happen. And I was told at the time that there was a chance that Juan Gaston was going to be a 5-star. I did not expect him to end up at number 18 overall. So for those that are unaware, the top 32 prospects, it's meant to replicate the NFL draft. So the first round of the NFL draft, that's meant to replicate the 5 stars that we apply to, how many players we apply 5 stars to in each class. And so he finished 18th. I think I thought he was going to be 26 range, something like that. So clearly there are people that are even higher on him than some of the conversations that I had, because he bumps all the way up to 18. He earns that 5-star. He's Georgia's first 5-star signing in the 24/7 rankings. I know that there might have been a 5-star here or there on some other sites, or maybe in the composite, but 24/7, top 24/7 rankings, first 5-star offensive line signee since Amarius Mims. I mean, this is huge. I mean, we've talked all over the last few weeks, like Georgia's got to upgrade on the offensive line. And as it turns out, they'd already brought in a really, really big 5-star piece in this most recent class.
Let's talk about huge, Ben. I'll call up, if you're listening to this, pulling up the video on the YouTube from Billy Tucker of Juan Gaston. And let's go full screen here and just watch this guy in action.
It's a big dude. This is a big dude. For those that are unaware, he measured in down at the Under Armour All-American game on their check-in day at 6'8", 388 pounds, which I think that might even send a little shudder up the spine of Stacey Searles when he heard that, because just plain and simple, 388 is too big to be playing offensive line at Georgia. But the way that he moved down there at 388, I think some of the stuff that he flashed on his basketball film made everyone realize, like, hell, if this guy is playing like this at 388, think how scary he's going to be at 330.
And you talked about the cardio club. I think it was on the first episode, but it's not uncommon. I don't think if you're a Georgia fan, you should be like panicked, like, oh, this guy's way too big. I mean, I think it was Daniel Calhoun you pointed out during last year in the lead up to the 2024 season that, he had noticeably cut a lot of weight. A lot of those guys, Nair Daniels was another guy, they're going to get in, they're going to get a chance to get settled, and they're going to get those guys in shape. It may not happen overnight, but I wouldn't worry about this guy might be too big. Nah, he's going to be putting in the work. He's going to be probably counting those calories and getting ready for his freshman year.
Absolutely. I will say, Jordan, you tried your best to spoil this on the Tuesday show. I know that we get early access to the rankings. You tried to put me on the spot. You tried your best to make me be the bad guy that ends up spoiling the 5-star news. Do you have any apologies for me or Juan or anyone, or are you proud of what you tried to do to me?
Ben, that's a tease. I don't know what you're talking about. We didn't spoil anything for anybody. Perhaps I should pay more attention to, the embargoes that are in those emails, but no harm, no foul. Hey, congrats to Juan. Big accomplishment being a 5-star.
Also, completely unrelated, but embargo is just all-time phrasing, all-time term. It doesn't get used enough. We always get the embargoed rankings, and every time I see it, I'm just like, man, that's a word that we should find a way to use more than we do.
Yeah, I'm a big fan.
All right, other 5-stars in the ranking. So Juan Gaston was not the only 5-star for Georgia. In fact, Georgia ended up with 4 5-stars in the final top 24/7. Defensive lineman Elijah Griffin actually moved up a spot to number 3. He was the one guy that split the quarterback. So there were 2 quarterbacks, 1 and 2. Tavian St. Clair, that's going to Ohio State, was number 4. Elijah Griffin was the one guy that they put in there to sort of split up those quarterbacks. He also earned a 100 rating. So again, this is another sort of inside baseball in the weeds. If you don't know enough about it, like every recruit gets a star rating. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stars. Anyone Georgia's signing is going to have 3, 4, or 5 stars. In many cases, 4 or 5 stars. They also get a rating attached to them. And so think of this like a Madden rating or an NCAA football rating, where it's not based on, like, there are guys that are 4 stars that will be a 97. And then there will be people, 30 spots below them that will also be a 97. And so I think it's a way of showing, like, hey, just because you're ranked 40th and this guy's ranked, 65th. There's really not as much of a difference in between those two players as it seems. You don't see 100 ratings very often. I think there might have been 3 at the end of this class. There might have been a few more than that, but Elijah Griffin was one of those who bumped up from a 98 rating to a 100 rating. So that should give you an idea of how strongly everyone in the industry feels about Elijah Griffin and how immediately he can impact things. Isaiah Gibson bumped down to the number 14 overall player, but he's still the number 1 edge. He's a 5-star. Zayden Walker bumped down to number 22, but he's the number 1 linebacker. He's a 5-star. I mean, Georgia signing 4 or 5 stars this cycle, all from the state of Georgia. There's been a lot of narratives through the years. Georgia can't sign the best players from the state of Georgia. That is a dead narrative.
No, I mean, I think you can't help but be impressed with this haul. I'm sure that there have been people on Dogs 24/7 in the last day or so who have been upset that some of those guys dropped. But I mean, to have that number of 5 stars, and again, we talked about this on that signing day show, talked to a few of them. I think Isaiah Gibson was one of the guys we asked about. So many of the top players in Georgia staying home. And I think sometimes we take that for granted because you've got so many programs in the Southeast trying to come into places like Atlanta, and they're going to get their share. But I think this is a very special 2025 class that Georgia signed. And I mean, super, I don't want to say top heavy as in, the players below these guys aren't as good or, aren't going to make as big an impact, but the top guys are just super impressive in this latest class.
There were some other big risers that I want to call out as well. I know everyone loves to worry about the guys that dropped. Oh, why is Ethan Barbour not in the top 24/7? I don't necessarily always disagree. Like I've voiced these things to our scouting team, but again, like we'll talk about with Andrew Ivins next week, like there are always logic-based, valid football reasons for why they have things, and they also acknowledge that they're not going to be perfect on everything either. They're trying to use the data points that they have and the historical evidence that they have to make the best decisions that they possibly can. But I'm going to focus on the risers because I'm a positive guy. Juan Gaston moved up 90 spots to number 18. Talon Taylor, wide receiver, moves up 9 spots to number 40. I know a lot of people are, again, this is where everyone wants to look at the negative in things all the time. And I got so many, why was Talon Taylor not a 5-star? Like, look, he was the number 40 player in the country. There's 32 5-stars. He was obviously in the conversation to become a 5-star. And if he had become a 5-star and Juan Gaston had been number 40, we would be having the same conversation about like, well, why was Juan Gaston not a 5-star? Like what could have happened there for him to bump up? So it's just the way that it goes sometimes. I know that Talon Taylor will be a 5-star on certain services. And I know this, I talked with multiple people down in San Antonio when they saw him, that they were having the discussion, like, should they bump him up to 5-star status? There's a lot of good wide receivers out there. They felt like he was the cream of the crop down there in San Antonio. And there were guys like Jamie French that I believe ended up as a 5-star. I could be off on that, but it was a conversation. And so don't look at being the number 40 player in the country as negative. Look at that as, holy smokes, you just moved up to number 40. You have a wide receiver now in this class that you should expect to be able to play right away. And I think how highly I think of Talon Taylor. I'll mention Rayshawn Dinkins. He's someone that we don't talk a lot about, and he was a 3-star at one point. He moved up 53 spots to number 165 in the rankings. That should tell you a lot about his senior film and what our scouting department feels about what he did late in his high school career. It's really not a surprise to me. He can do everything on a football field. I think he's someone, even though he's going to be a late arrival, he's not getting here until May, someone that everyone should be super excited about. And then I'll also call out Peachtree Ridge Proud. I'm going to do it anytime that I can. Dennis Uzochukwu, the offensive lineman from Peachtree Ridge High School, he didn't crack the top 24/7, but he did bump up to 4-star status. So he earned that 4th star. Another one that just makes a lot of sense. Like he has all the measurables. He had a really good senior year, high character guy. Like I like it. I played 0 role whatsoever in that. I want that on the record. This is not Peachtree Ridge biases playing into the 24/7 sports rankings. This was just some really critical viewing of his senior year and realizing that he deserved that bump up.
Yeah, Dennis was really impressive when we talked to him. I mean, Ben, I just enjoyed, a pleasant conversation with someone from Peachtree Ridge. There's just very few and far between in my experience.
Yeah, no, he gave you a good impression of Peachtree Ridge. I like to have you can get both ends of the spectrum. Like, let's enjoy talking to people with Peachtree Ridge. We'll have Dennis on. You don't want to, you'll just do every show with me. So you'll get the best and worst of both worlds.
Wouldn't have it any other way, buddy.
Exactly right. So just in sort of wrapping up this class, because this will be the final update. I guess there is still a chance that Georgia could add Javari Flowers. We just mentioned him. I'm not expecting any more movement in the 2025 class, but I just can't rule it out entirely. So Georgia finished with 20 of their 28 signees as blue chip recruits. So 20 guys, 4-star or higher. Half of the class finished in the top 24/7. There were 3 5-stars in the trenches: Gibson, Griffin, Gaston. You could also throw Zayden Walker in there as well, since he is that pass rushing linebacker type. You've got a top 24/7 quarterback in Ryan Montgomery, 2 top 50 pass catchers in Talon Taylor, who finished 40th, Elias Williams, who finished 49th again. I know Elias is another one. How did he fall from 5-star status, whatever? Like, he's a top 50 player. Everyone thinks super highly of him. You could have the debate fairly about whether he should or should not be a 5-star. I am always going to be a little bit biased because I get direct access to Elias. Like, I've gotten to know him. I think very highly of him. There are other people in the scouting department that also have that same level of access to a lot of other great players nationally that I don't. So again, it's fair to disagree. I just think it's also fair to be reasonable with why the rankings end up the way that they do. 5-star offensive tackle for the first time in 4 cycles. Georgia looks like it's going to finish up with the number 2 recruiting class in the 25 cycle behind Texas. So, for a school that our Junkyard board over at Dogs 24/7, they love to tell us, hey, high school recruiting doesn't matter. We can't get anybody because NIL and the portal have ruined everything. Seems like that might be a bad narrative as well. What do you think?
A little bit spoiled, but it happens to every fan base. I don't want it to seem like I'm just taking shots at Georgia. And my mindset, one, is just trust these coaches. Even if there's a class that's considered down, which I wouldn't consider this. I mean, they know their evaluations. Just look at what they've done. But, I mean, Georgia pretty much assigned top 5 classes. It's mostly been top 3 classes since Kirby got here. When it comes to recruiting, just trust Kirby Smart and what they're doing. I see no reason to poke holes, but we love the folks who poke holes. They keep us in business, Ben.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm over here fighting on our board right now about whether Texas is or is not a prestigious college football program, and so we're liable to. I mean, if you like to disagree with people online, subscribe to Dogs 24/7. I'll tell you what, because there's plenty of it to go around on our message board. It doesn't matter how many national championships you win. It doesn't matter if you win the SEC championship. There will always be something for someone to be up in arms about. So join us over there because we have a lot of fun over there on the message board. We're about to jump to the interview. We're going to take a quick break for ads, and then we're going to jump into the Lincoln Keys interview, talking to that tight end in the 2026 recruiting class. It will be our first one that's on Zoom. So as always, would love feedback from anyone on what you like, what you don't like. We'll have done one in person with Talon. We're going to do one over Zoom now here with Lincoln. We'll have one probably on Zoom next week, and then another one in person the week after that. So any feedback is greatly appreciated. I thought Lincoln was awesome during this conversation, and we actually talked the day before Kirby Smart and Todd Hartley went up to his school to go see him. So he mentioned that during the interview as well, that he was going to be seeing Hartley over the course of the next week. And so thought that there was some really, really good stuff there. So when we get back from break, we will jump into that interview. But before we do that, I know I just called out Dogs 24/7. It is my moral and civic duty to suggest that if you're enjoying these shows, whether you are watching it live on YouTube or Twitter or Facebook, or whether you are listening to it after the fact in any of those places or wherever you get your podcasts, we appreciate you. Please like and subscribe wherever it is that you are getting it. We want better data on where most of our audience is listening to the show, watching the show, what that looks like. Anytime you want to comment and give your feedback, we appreciate that as well. I mentioned this on the last show. If you want to give us a 5-star review on the podcast app, please do. I didn't even check to see if we got any this last time, but if we do, we will read that out on any episodes where we get 5 stars. If you give us a 1-star, not happening. So give us a 5-star, but also subscribe to Dogs 24/7. We do a lot of great work over there, covering the team, covering basketball, covering baseball, covering recruiting. We have stuff all year long, and we love providing this, free conversational type of content here, but we have a lot of VIP content as well that I think is worth the watch and read too. So definitely go check that out. We're going to head to break, and when we come back, we will jump right into the Lincoln Keys interview. Today, we've got a very, very, very special guest, 6'6", 235 pounds, ranked as a 4-star prospect in the top 24/7 rankings. You'd be a 5-star as far as I'm concerned. I know he scored 8 touchdowns as a junior, dropped 69 points in his rec league game with the boys earlier this week, committed to Georgia on November 17th, and we'll get a little bit more into that. But Lincoln Keys, tight end from Michigan, thank you for joining the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
We'll start with an easy one, and we've talked about this a little bit over the last few months, but why Georgia?
I definitely visited a lot of schools. My recruiting blew up around this time last year. I got my first offer, and it just took off from there. I have 31 offers right now, but, I'm committed to Georgia. I visited a lot of places in the Midwest, and I went down to Georgia 3 times. First time I camped there, that's when I got offered. Had a great workout with Coach Hartley. That's my guy. I love him. He's a great guy, great husband, great coach. I love everything about him. Second time went down for the Clemson game. They killed them. That was a great game to be there for. And then the Tennessee game, that was just electric. I love that game so much. And I turned to my mom when they were playing, and the fireworks went off when they scored, and I was like, I want to play here so bad. So that next morning I committed with Coach Hartley, and ever since then I want to be there so bad. I'm so excited for next year, because once I get there, I'm just ready to be developed and get to be the best player I can be.
For sure. And I feel like it's almost like you read my notebook and you knew some of the things I was going to ask, because I wanted to ask more about some of those specific visits, those 3 visits that you took. So we'll get into that in a second. But you brought up Coach Hartley. It's not a newsflash to anybody listening to this that Todd Hartley is a great recruiter. He's a great coach. You mentioned some of the things that you like about him, but what is it specifically that allows him to stack tight end classes year over year over year?
I would call Georgia one of the tight end U's. It's a great tight end school. I think that the 3 things, the 3 things that I was looking for in a school that I was choosing was development, because I've always wanted to play in the NFL. That's my end goal. My relationships with coaches. So Hartley, he's always been we've always been so close. Ever since I met him, I felt like we kind of just clicked, and we call, we text all the time. We're always talking. We have a great relationship. And my third reason, and this was really important to me, is how the school uses tight ends, because I think that the tight end position is it's so misunderstood, and it's that the game's changing. Right now, back then, the tight end was just an extra O lineman, they would just sit on the line and block. But it's hard to find a guy who's 6'5", 6'6" that can run a 4.5 and can go run really good routes on a DB, but then also go block at the end. So I think that a school like Georgia, I remember them using Brock all the time, and all the stuff they did with him. That's something that I want to be used, because it's really important.
For sure. I want to talk about those visits that you took, just because I think that your recruiting story is a very good it's a good sign of experience for others to recognize what it takes to get recruited by a place like Georgia, and for you to kind of buy into a place like Georgia. And I want to start with the camp visit, because like you mentioned, before you went on that camp to Georgia, your recruitment had started to blow up a little bit. You didn't have an offer from Georgia when you went down on that camp visit. And as you know from experience, camping at Georgia is a big deal for them in their evaluation process of players. What made you want to get down to Georgia on that camp visit? And I think you ran like a 4.6 or something like that. I know you balled out at that camp, picked up an offer right away. But tell me about that experience and how critical you think that was to becoming a top tight end target for Georgia.
I mean, it was definitely important to them. I mean, I've talked to Hartley about this, but like they wanted to see me in person. I hadn't gotten a lot of like big Power 4 offers. Like I had gotten like some schools, but not like the dominant, like known schools. Like I hadn't had Michigan. I had just gotten Ohio State because I camped there. But originally Alabama reached out to my coach and they wanted me to camp down there. And I was like, why don't I go down to Georgia too? And so I went down there. I didn't really know what to expect. I always was kind of like looking at Georgia, but I just hadn't gotten an offer yet and I hadn't been down there. But when I went down there, I loved where we stayed. I loved the town. Me and my dad got there the night before. We walked around, got dinner, and I love the town there. I love Athens. It's so nice. It was sunny. It felt good. And I love the warmth. Like I hate the cold and I live in Michigan. So like, that's kind of weird to say, but I can't wait to get down there. I want to live in the South when I'm older too. But camp the next day, I think it was like 100 degrees out or something crazy like that. I camped with Moose Ludwig, great tight end, another prospect. We had a great workout. I mean, we worked really hard. It was amazing. And then he offered both of us, and we stayed for like the practice after, got to see all the facilities and stuff, and I just loved it. I mean, I loved Hartley. I love the workout. I love all the things that we worked on and just how like it was an even amount of blocking and passing, and ball catching and working on all that. And I think that was really important to me. I loved Hartley. I loved how he coaches. And like, I felt like it like works well with me, and I think that like he's kind of loud when he coaches, but like I like that. And I fell in love with it that day. So it was a great day for me.
For sure. And then you come back for the Clemson game, which was in Atlanta. So you were watching them play in Atlanta, but I know that contact period started, I think, the next day after that. And this was probably the first sign to me, like, all right, there's something serious here between Georgia and Lincoln. Like, it's not just he's been offered or whatever. Like, he's wanting to get back down multi-days. You got back over to Athens, brought your parents down. I mean, I know that you didn't commit for a few months, but like when you left Georgia that weekend, did you feel like Georgia was probably going to end up being the spot?
Yeah, I mean, I felt like, especially my parents and like me, like we kind of just felt like we liked it. And like, honestly, like it wasn't really always said, but like those couple months after that Clemson visit and before I committed, like we talked about it like I was committed there almost. Like we were watching all the games on TV, Harley was talking to my parents. Like it felt like I was pretty much committed, but I wasn't yet. So, that was one of the things that like it just kind of made me realize. And I wanted to commit early, like I always had said that. Like I just wanted to get that out of the way because, like, now that I'm committed, I don't have to worry about recruiting, and I'm just gonna put my head down and grind for next senior season. But I definitely like those couple months. I kind of felt like it was home, and I just waited till after the season to commit, and then I went back down there for that amazing game, and it was like the cherry on top. Like I just knew that that's where I wanted to be.
Yeah, so I mean, it sounds like a stupid question at this point with everything that you just said, but you get to that Tennessee game, environment's electric. I think that might have been the first game that they were doing the fireworks too. I can't remember if it was the first one or not.
Yeah,
anybody that was there was mesmerized by them. What specifically was it that made you say, all right, I feel like I'm choosing Georgia, but now I want to put it out there to the world? Like, what made you ready to do it right after that Tennessee game?
I mean, honestly, like it was when Delp scored that touchdown, fireworks went off, tight end scoring. All the tight ends had a great game. I remember it was just electric. It was a close game at first, and then they were just killing them. It was a great game. I loved like the energy, and I like a big stage, like that's how I am. Like I like pressure. I play good under like big pressure. That's how I work, and I felt like I could kind of feel the pressure and energy, and I loved it. So I think like that's when I turned to my mom and told her like I want to play here, and I committed that next morning.
Cool. Now, I got to ask this one. You're 15 minutes from Michigan Stadium. If I understand correctly, you grew up around a lot of Michigan people. You probably grew up rooting. Is it fair to say you grew up rooting for Michigan?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So how does someone as talented as you, that close to Michigan, end up anywhere else other than Michigan?
Well, I was born in Chicago, so I lived there for about 7 years. But my family's always lived in Ann Arbor, so we moved back here. I actually have an Ann Arbor address, so I'm in the town. But you know, Michigan offered. I worked out for Michigan a couple times. I liked it there, but like I've always been a big fan. Like I used to have like Michigan flags in my room, all that. But you know, I worked out there. I didn't get the offer. I moved on, and I went down to Georgia, and it just felt more like home to me. Like I don't really want to be a guy that stays home that much, and it just feels like Georgia's like the right spot for me. Like it's my gut feeling, and I'm just trusting my gut, especially. And I feel like that's where I want to be, and just because Michigan's close to me, I mean, they were definitely a top contender. I mean, especially me growing up, like wanting to play there. I like Georgia better. I mean, Georgia's my home.
For sure. So what are the vibes in Michigan right now? Like they beat Ohio State, then Ohio State wins the Natty. Like what are the people feeling up there about that?
I mean, a lot of like diehard Michigan fans are saying that they won the national championship since they beat them, but that's just people. But I think that they had a rough season this year. I think they got a pretty good recruiting class this coming year, and I think they might turn things around. And I'm excited to see what they do next year. But I think that they just didn't have a great season this year.
Now, I know Ohio State was one of the big time contenders. I know they were one of the first big time programs that offered you. Did they ever have a chance, or did your Michigan fandom get in the way there?
No, it actually didn't at all. At one point, I wanted to go to Ohio State more than Michigan for a little bit, but I think the factor that just made me not go there was how they use their tight ends. I just don't think they use them as well as Michigan or Georgia. So that's just how that worked out, and they kind of fell off the list a little bit.
You mentioned earlier you went to a Georgia practice after you had camped, and there's always stories of Kirby Smart on the mic. Have you heard any Kirby? He's loud. He likes to talk his smack to coaches, players. Nobody's safe, is what I've been told. What's the most memorable thing you've heard Kirby Smart say on the mic?
Yeah, I remember it was like I said, we were working out. It was like 100 degrees. I think my workout was probably at I don't know, middle of the day, maybe like 2 or 3. They had practiced at like 5, sun's still out. They had to run around the field with the coaches, and I forget what the time was, but under the time, it was, I forget how many laps it was. They call it something. I'm forgetting what it is, but they ran a couple laps, didn't get it again. Kirby's yelling. And I was just like, geez, this is like 100 degrees. Everyone's running. I was like, that's crazy. But eventually they got it. They all stepped up. So I thought that was pretty cool, and just how he was pushing everyone.
For sure. Yeah, I've heard him get after media members that are out there at practice. I've heard him get after assistant coaches, players. Like I said, I think an on-field coach at one point, I think, said nobody's safe when Kirby Smart's on the mic. And I think, that's a good thing probably. Yeah. All right. I know I brought this up earlier. You scored 69 points in a rec league game. I know you played for your high school team, and sometimes, playing rec ball with the boys, like it's just a fun thing to do. Anyone that's, played rec ball with their boys, that it's one of the more fun memories. I still think about my rec ball days because it's such a good time. I know most football players that play basketball, they're usually hustle guys, getting rebounds. You might catch an elbow from them here or there. You're scoring 70 points in a game. Tell me about your game and how you managed to pull that off.
Well, I mean, originally, probably up until 8th grade, I wanted to play in the NBA. That was I wanted to play in the NFL, but my main sport was basketball. I wanted to do that. I played on a pretty good travel team. I loved basketball, but once you start getting up there and you start playing these teams that are just there's these dudes that are 6'9", but they're just extremely athletic, and it's just you kind of realize some of that stuff's it wasn't for me, and then I realized that I was better at football and I loved football more, and I started playing more. But I played for my high school team last year. We had a 4-star point guard, Jonathan Sanderson. That's one of my best friends. He's a great player. I mean, he's amazing. But he moved.
I think I saw you share some of his clips on social. I think he did a between the legs dunk or something like that. Yeah, he can bounce.
Yeah, he's crazy. But he moved to Tennessee, so it was me, him, and then my quarterback. We were the best 3 players on that team. We were really good. But then this year I wanted to focus on basketball and stuff. So that's what I decided to do. But playing with some of my best friends who played basketball for a while, and we all played on the same travel team. And we were just throwing lobs. I mean, I just caught, I don't know, maybe 20 lobs. We were just messing around. That team wasn't the best, but they were still pretty good. But I caught like 20 lobs, only 1 of 3 out of those 69 points. So it was kind of crazy. But yeah, I was just catching lobs left and right, messing around. So, it was just nothing too crazy.
I'm gonna need you to send me some clips of that. I didn't know you could jump like that.
Yeah, no, I can.
I know you're 6'6", so it's,
yeah, I can jump pretty high. So
all right, I'm gonna need to see some of those.
Throwing them off the backboard, throwing them in between the legs up. It was fun. So
all right, sweet. I guess I asked about your basketball game before I even asked about your football game. And for anybody that's watching this, we will later in the show have a segment with some huddle clips breaking down film of Lincoln as well. But I'd love to hear from you. Like, describe your game as a tight end, what you bring to a football field.
Yeah, I mean, as a tight end, I think like one of the most important things, is just being dominant. Like that's the word that I'm always going to say. I've always said is like just being dominant. Like a great tight end is just dominant in all run game, pass game, all of that. And I think that my strength, especially this past season, was my pass game. I run really good routes, especially for being 6'6", 240. I mean, I can run, I can move. I run great routes. And whenever the ball's in there, I'm going to come down with it. I mean, that's just like, it's not even a variable. Like I'm always going to get the ball no matter what. My quarterback knows that. But I also think I'm really fast. But I think my weakness this year was my blocking. It wasn't bad at all. But I think that that's something that I've been working on real hard this offseason. You're going to see some drastic improvement this coming year. But I'm a pretty good blocker. I'm explosive. Hit people right in the chest, knock them on their butt. And I think that both run game and pass game, I'm dominant.
Sure. You mentioned earlier Brock Bowers, and I feel like you can't have a tight end conversation in the Georgia sphere without mentioning Brock Bowers' name. And I'm curious, like, Georgia's had success with other tight ends. I mean, you can go through the list of guys that are playing now, have played over the last few years that were successful, but Brock's name is always going to be one of the first that comes up. Like, I don't know the best way to frame this question, but like, how much did Brock's success both at Georgia and now as a rookie with the Raiders impact the way that tight ends view Georgia as a tight end room?
I think it definitely, like, especially speaking, like, I know a lot of other tight end prospects, like, especially just talking about Brock, like, probably one of the best tight ends ever. I mean, he's a smaller tight end, but he's just such an amazing player. And I think that, it's definitely changed a lot. A lot of guys talk about him. It's definitely changed the look on Georgia. I mean, Darnell Washington too. Those two were just like unstoppable. And I think that, like, for me, Darnell was like 6'8", 6'7", 6'8", huge. Brock was like 6'3", 6'4", and I think I'm right in the middle. I think I got the best of both worlds, So I think that that's something that, like, I'm gonna try to highlight on when I'm in Georgia. Like, I'm gonna move like Brock. I'm gonna catch like Brock, but I'm gonna block like Darnell. So that's what I want to do.
I mean, knowing that you were sort of feeling like you were going to end up at Georgia throughout the course of this year, were you watching any Raiders games and watching Brock at all throughout the year?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't watch too much NFL. I more watch college. I just think it's more fun to watch, But I definitely watch some Raiders games, and he's just such a dog. I mean, he's unstoppable, and I think that, like, him breaking all those records too as a rookie, I mean, it's sweet.
How much have you gotten to know any of the other guys in the 2026 class, like the guys that are already committed to Georgia?
Yeah, I haven't actually got to meet any of them yet. I've met Mark Bowman. I know he just reclassed up, and I've been trying to get him to Georgia with me. I mean, I love that guy. He visited with me at tennis when we were at the Tennessee game. So I'm hoping I'm going to try to get him there. I mean, Hartley thinks that me and him would be an unstoppable duo. I mean, that would be sweet. But Vance and Mark, we're going to play in the same 7-on-17 California Power. So.
Oh, you're playing Cali Power this year?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'll be at some of your events for sure.
Oh, really?
Oh, no doubt.
Yeah. So we got our first one this coming weekend in Arizona. So I'm gonna meet Vance, and he's committed. So that's gonna be fun. So yeah.
For sure. Yeah, no, I feel like Georgia has gotten a lot of guys from Cali Power over the last few years. Like Ethan Barbour was playing for Cali Power last year as well. Vance, you mentioned Mark. I was going to you've been teeing me up for my next questions perfectly. I feel like every time throughout this interview, I was going to ask, like, I know last time we talked, like, whoever Hartley wants you to help recruit to Georgia, like, you want to know who they want and you're going to help recruit them. You mentioned Mark Bowman there. I know you mentioned Moose Ludwig earlier and you guys camped together. who are the guys that you're sort of zoning in on right now that you'd like to come play with you at Georgia?
I mean, you name those two guys. I think that Moose and Mark are definitely two different types of players, but I think they both complement me well, and I think that both of those guys would be a great duo, honestly. I love Mark. Met Mark actually at the Tennessee game, but we kind of clicked. I like that guy a lot. He's a great player. I mean, he's really good. It would be sweet. I'm definitely trying to get him to Georgia with me because we're taking two tight ends. I think he would be a great player, and I think that Moose he's a really dominant tight end, which is something that's important, like I said, and he'll do the dirty work for sure, and I think that's like he's a good hard worker, and I think that's important.
I'm curious, what is it about, and maybe it's the way that Georgia uses the tight ends. I'm not sure, but like sometimes you'll get within position groups, like there's a lot of competition. Guys want to be the guy. And it feels like every year the tight ends that Georgia is recruiting, like they want to help recruit other tight ends to come along with them. Like, what is it that creates that environment? Like, is it just because they run so much 12 and 13 personnel that it's easy, or is it more the culture that Todd Hartley's created in that room?
I mean, I think it's a little of both. I mean, definitely Georgia's like in 12 and 13 personnel all the time. And I think that like they're playing. I mean, I looked at like there was like a stat sheet that Hartley sent me, and like I forget what it was, but all three tight ends at one game played like 33 plays each or something, like all equal. And it was just like, they're playing a lot of tight ends. So, if I'm bringing another tight end with me, I'm competing with them, of course, because I want to be the best, but we can complement each other, and like if I'm not getting the ball, then he can get the ball, you know what I'm saying? So I think that's really important. I think that Hartley, like he wants the room like a family, and I think that's really important, and I want to be close with all my teammates. So
I heard that you might have gotten some new tats recently. Is that true?
Yeah.
What's the Lincoln Key's favorite tat that he's got?
This one on my front of my arm's my favorite for sure. I got this not too long ago.
What we got there?
Chicago right here. I got my dad's jersey right here, and then my jersey right here. I'm hoping I can get 17 when I come to Georgia. I love that number. But me and my dad's jersey, and then Chicago. This is just like a little stamp. It says Chicago made on it. But I was born in Chicago. I love cities. That's where I think I want to live. I'm hoping I get maybe drafted to like a city team, like I don't know where, but I think that would be sweet. I love cities, and I was born in Chicago, so it's sweet. I love it.
That's cool. So what's the significance behind 17? Anything in particular?
I mean, not too much. I mean, my birthday is January 17th, so it's just
happy belated birthday. Sorry we missed it.
I appreciate that. But it's always been my number ever since I was like, I don't know, 5 or 6. It's just I chose that because of my birthday, and it's just been that ever since. So I love that number. I think it's a good tight end number too. Brock wore 18, so I think just one number lower would be sweet.
For sure. All right, man. Well, do you know the next time you're getting back down to Athens?
No, not yet. I got to plan that out. But Hartley's coming up on Monday to my school, so we'll probably talk about it then and see what we're doing.
All right, cool. Well, the only rule is now that you've come on the show, anytime that I reach out and I want to bring you back on the show, you got to say yes. That's just part of the rules. We'll plan something later on in the year around when you get back up to Georgia. But as always, appreciate you having on. I know the fans are going to be super excited to have heard from you, got to learn from you a little bit more. And let's see if you can drop 70 next week in your.
Oh yeah, I got you.
All right. Everyone just heard me and Lincoln talk for about 20 minutes, so I'm curious to hear from you, Jordan. Anything that stand out to you from that conversation, other than my little cheap shot at Kirby Smart yelling at you at practice?
I don't even know what you're talking about. I must have just totally missed that, Ben. No, I thought it was a great interview. I hadn't really heard from Lincoln Keys before this, so it was cool to listen to your conversation. Man, what a game to come to if you're a tight end. He went to the Tennessee game, and if you're wanting to convince a tight end to come to Georgia, that felt like the game to do it. Oscar Delp had a big game. I think some of the other tight ends were involved as well. Really liked the story toward the end about his tattoos. And what it reminds me of, Ben, I don't know if you saw this during the season, Tate Ratledge talking about his tattoos. He had I think maybe the street he grew up on. He had a clock tower for Rome, very intentional tattoos. And very much the same story there when Lincoln Keys. And the only other thing I'd say is I liked him being like, yeah, Coach Hartley's loud, but I like that. Yeah, let's check back in if he's going to like that when they're in August of his freshman year and he's getting after him. But no, thought it was a really good interview. Enjoyed listening to Lincoln. I was super impressed with what he had to share.
Yeah, he was great. He's definitely someone that we will have back on again before we do a signing day show, and then hopefully he'll be part of the signing day show as well because he's great. Do we have some highlights of his pulled up, ready to go? For those that are watching on YouTube, we're gonna have some highlights going while we talk through this here. And if you're listening on podcast, we'll just sort of give you some insights into what his game is. He mentioned it there during that interview, like 6'6", 240 pounds. From a size frame standpoint, he sort of splits the gap of Brock Bowers and Darnell Washington. Like, he is a more prototypical tight end frame than Brock Bowers probably was, but he's not, freakish Frankenstein Darnell Washington. Like I used to always say, like, Darnell Washington is one of one, and anybody who says they feel like they can be like Darnell Washington is lying to themselves. So I think that Lincoln was savvy to sort of say, hey, I'm trying to sort of split the gap in terms of what they do. Like, I can move around, I can catch, I'm athletic, I can do some of those things you're seeing here. He's catching screens, he's getting the ball quick and really strong after the catch. But he's also going to do some of that inline blocking, and he's got the size and ability to be able to do that. He's not necessarily going to be flattening people like a left tackle like Darnell Washington was, but Lincoln mentioned it during that interview. Like, that's an area that he's expecting to see a lot of progress during the course of this season. But you're just going to get a lot of productivity, and you're going to get the Georgia has, I don't want to say Georgia singularly has reformed the tight end position, but I think the way that you think of tight ends is different now than it used to be. And I think Brock Bowers has played a key role in that. And so I think that Georgia is constantly going to be looking for tight ends that they feel like can be dynamic game changers with the ball in their hand, but can also do all of the things that Georgia asks its tight ends to do in run block. Ben Yurosek, I think, was a good example of that this season, where once he got comfortable, he was very much getting involved in the downfield passing game. But anytime you saw Georgia in 12 personnel, you were likely seeing Ben Yurosek there as one of those get after him type of blockers. And I think that Lincoln Keys brings a lot of that to his game as well.
Really like what I'm seeing of him. Like, his stride for a guy his size really stands out to me. But even going back to the interview, Ben, and I think you had just mentioned that, like, him taking note of, I got to improve as a blocker. And, I think that's an adjustment some of these tight ends have to make when they get to Georgia. You think of some of the guys they sign a lot of the time, they played more as wide receivers when they were in high school because of their catching ability. And, they blocked some, but it wasn't like a huge part of their game. I think that's going to be a big advantage for him going into his senior year, that he comes in understanding, okay, I have to improve in this area. Seems like he's taken that to heart. And, you watch these highlights, a lot of what we've seen to this point are more of him as a receiver. But I think we'll probably see some pancakes, some more of that when we are having this conversation after his senior year. I think that he understands what he's got to get better at, and I think he's going to put in a lot of effort to make it happen.
No doubt. So thank you to Lincoln Keys for coming on the show. We really appreciated him. If you know somebody that you would like to have on the show, or someone that you'd like to hear from, I said this on the last episode, we will put in the work behind the scenes to get them on the show. Unfortunately, we don't have much access, beyond the standard press conferences to guys that are already at Georgia. So we want to get creative with recruits, scouting folks, former Georgia players, people in the Georgia high school coaching community that are relevant to Georgia signees, like whatever that might be. I think there's a lot of opportunities for who we can talk to. So if you're listening to this and you've got some ideas, don't hesitate to tweet at me, post on Instagram, reply to us in the YouTube channel, subscribe to Dogs 24/7, and let us know on the threads, whatever that might be. All right, arrow pointing up, Jordan. I'm gonna let you start. Whose arrow's pointing up?
So arrows pointing up. I'm gonna start with. I have two, and I have one that is more local, and then one that's kind of a bigger picture. Part of a conversation I'll be looking forward to having with you. And Arrow pointing up, Dylan James on the basketball team. He's a guy that before Tuesday's game against South Carolina hadn't really played a ton. Now, he did play 18 minutes in the game against Florida, but I kind of wrote it off, Ben. I was like, look, they're getting demolished. They're going to give some other guys some run. I'll shout out, I don't remember who had posted on the board, maybe in the last week or two, someone had asked about Dylan, and I was really pretty upfront of being like, I just don't know that, why that the question was, why was he not playing that much? And I was pretty upfront about, I just don't think he really fits into what they want to do, that he's not quite there as far as earning minutes. And then he did it on Tuesday night, had an outstanding game, 10 points, 8 points in the first half alone, had a block, had, I think, 5 rebounds. I'll pull up the highlights and let you talk a little bit about Dylan's play as well. But, I mean, you had done a good job of kind of laying out the stakes on that Tuesday episode. And I saw someone earlier on in the comments had said that, that was a great rant that you went on about Georgia basketball. But to be serious, we knew that this was going to be a crucial game for them. They needed guys to step up. He wasn't alone, but, man, I was super impressed with what Dylan James was able to do.
I agree completely. I mentioned it at halftime on the live thread that you were running on the board. Like, he hadn't played as much. Like, he'd only played single-digit minutes 5 or 6 games before that, but then he played 18 against Florida, and I really just thought it was a matter of, like, the game got out of hand against Florida, everybody got into the rotation, everyone was going to get minutes, but for him to play the way that he did in that must-win against South Carolina, I think Georgia realized it had a front-court advantage in that game against South Carolina. We've talked about Asa Newell and Santos Sorella a bunch throughout this year, but I think Dylan James, with his length and athleticism, was able to just be a little bit craftier around the rim from a scoring standpoint, and it showed. I mean, he was great, and I think, I think Georgia was going to win that game no matter what, but I think that his role that he played in that made it a hell of a lot easier.
Yeah, I mean, I was super impressed. My only critique of whoever did these edits, they did not have that Dakota LaFew behind the back pass. Man, that was up there with one of the plays of the season for me. A heck of a play. Asa throws it down with a dunk. I asked Mike White about it afterwards. What'd you think of that pass? And he said, that's one of those no, good pass, kind of plays. And, Dylan James, Dakota LaFew, Asa Newell, they stepped up and they got a win that I thought Georgia basketball had to have.
That Dakota pass was so surprising, and it just felt like it just didn't look like it was going to be possible in that situation. At first, I thought it was an accident. I can't remember who it was that was flashing in front of Asa that the defender went with. I thought he was trying to go behind the back to him, and he just misfired a little bit and then ended up with Asa. But heads up play by Dakota, who got into the starting lineup. And I feel like that role might just suit him a little bit better too.
Yeah, I think he's going to benefit there. 14 points. I think you'll see more there. All right, Ben, my second one, DVDs. Now, DVDs, arrow pointing up. Now, I want to start here. Do you watch Severance? Have you watched Severance?
I have not, but I need to.
So I haven't either. I've heard nothing but good things. But I bring up Severance because of this story that I read. This might have been last week. Christopher Walken, legend. He's 81 years old. He's on Severance. He said that, he doesn't have a cell phone. He doesn't email. So the folks on Severance, so he can watch the show once it's done, they put together DVDs to mail to Christopher Walken because he doesn't know how to stream Apple TV, and God knows he couldn't afford to pay somebody to come to his house and set it up. So he is a big DVD guy. And I'm saying this to also get into what's now become a bad habit of mine. I've always been someone who really likes physical media. I have way too many vinyl records at our house. I'm a big vinyl record collector, but 2025, I've decided I'm bringing back DVDs, and it's something that kind of got brought up. I listened to The Big Picture, which is a movie podcast on The Ringer, and Sean Fennessy, one of the hosts, talks about keeping DVDs and that people are going to turn around one day and miss having them. And I'm someone, Ben, and I think you're a little like this. I'm a big movie guy. I could sit around and just watch movies all day. And so what I've started doing when you do that, there's a lot of movies that are streaming online, but I run into a lot, there's some streaming where if you've got a subscription, you can watch it for free. But a lot of the time there's movies that, I have to go to Amazon and rent it for $4, or I got to go to YouTube. And I'm like, this sucks. Why am I having to pay on top of, having 6 or 7 subscriptions? So my wife and I really like going to antique stores. Well, they're selling DVDs, Ben, for like $1, which is cheaper than you can get, if I rented one from YouTube. So I have accumulated a stack of probably 9 or 10 movies in the last month, and it's probably cost me $13, I would say. But I'm going all in on DVDs, Ben. Arrow pointing up. If Christopher Walken's doing it, why would you not follow his lead? I'm bringing back DVDs. I hope you will join me on this.
Yeah, hey, I'll go arrow pointing up on DVDs. I'm with you on the physical media. Like if I'm reading a book, I can't do Kindle or iPad. Like I got to read it. I got to read the book. But yeah, like arrow pointed up on DVDs. And maybe one day we'll get a Junkyard Dawgcast DVD, or maybe that's a Christmas gift I could work on for you, finding a way to capture the best of Dogs 24/7 via DVD. I don't know. That's something I'll sit on.
I like it. I love it.
All right, arrow pointing up for me. I'm going to start with, got a few. I'm going to start with Dogs 24/7 baseball coverage. We mentioned this on the last episode. If you're subscribed to Dogs 24/7 already, you've likely already seen this. But we brought on board this week, might have been into last week, all the days mixed together now. But Olivia Sayer is the newest member of the Dogs 24/7 team. She will be handling Georgia baseball coverage this year. She's done it in the past, and she's done a great job of it for other outlets. We have not stepped into the Georgia baseball coverage, aside from Jordan ruining last year's College World Series run and him covering that last game of the Super Regionals. Other than that, we really haven't done a whole lot of baseball coverage. So Olivia, she's going to do an awesome job. I don't have her social right on hand, right up front, but maybe you'll be able to grab it here in a second. But go shoot her a follow, because she will have great content, and then subscribe to us for some good baseball coverage, because it's a top 5 team in America.
Yeah, I was going to make that point that, it's a shame we haven't been able to cover it in the past, but if you're going to add some baseball coverage, this is the year to do it. I think they're ranked number 4 in the preseason, according to Perfect Game, and you've got number 11 in Baseball America. This is going to be a very good team. And Olivia Sayer, you can follow her on Twitter at Olivia K. Sayer, which is Sayer. She wrote a story earlier this week looking back to last season, some of the top 10 highlights for Wes Johnson. And I know she's excited to get going. I know she'll have a lot of season previews once they get the interviews going. And we'll have her on the podcast some, especially once this baseball season gets started. I think it's going to be a fun time. And big fan, you would really hope that 24/7 would have learned to stop hiring red and black people. They got you, they got me, but they finally got one with some talent and some promise for the future. I think Olivia's going to do a great job.
Absolutely. All right, arrow pointing up also on the Texas bag. Every time that we cover a recruitment that gets involved with Texas, this term comes out, the bag, the money, the NIL. It's the buzz phrase that everyone loves to use. And look, I'm not discrediting that there is an element of that. And what I will say, the reason why I'm bringing this up is because most recently, Georgia went after Hiro Kano, the Ohio State defensive line transfer, in the transfer portal. He took an official visit to Georgia on Tuesday. By Wednesday morning, he was publicly committed to Texas. So it was a quick turnaround on that. That was an expected quick turnaround, because he was trying to enroll in all of these schools a lot later than you're supposed to be able to. And I know just from some conversations I've had behind the scenes, like Georgia went to some extra lengths to try and get the academic side of things, more possible than it has been in other situations. Like it is easier at some schools than it is at Georgia, but Georgia had the alignment here. I think even, people up high up in Georgia academic administration were involved in trying to make it work so that they could get him in. He spent a lot of time with Trey Scott on Tuesday. I know that he's got some connections with JJ Hanna in this class, but he does not end up signing with Georgia. From talking to some people in his camp, I think that there is part of Hiro that really wanted to come to Georgia and that really was buying what Trey Scott was selling, the development, the football, the X's and O's, those types of things were important to him. Ultimately, and as it's been communicated to me, like there are certain recruitments that Texas is going to make it just about impossible for anybody to be able to get. And that's really not intended to be any kind of cheap shot at Texas. In fact, I'd say it's the exact opposite. Like when NIL became something that was going to be a major factor in recruiting, there were the haves and there were the have-nots. Georgia is one of the haves, and you should be very fortunate that Georgia is one of the haves. But there are certain programs that just have resources that others don't. And Texas, as big as it is, the brand as big as it is, the alumni base as big as it is, the endowment the big as it is, the donations the big as it is, Texas is basically in a league of its own in terms of how it's going to be able to operate on that front. And that everything's bigger in Texas. That is not a news flash. Go to one Texas football game at night against Georgia and watch their drone show, and you will know that they do things differently and bigger than everyone else does. So it really is a credit to Texas, but it's also just an acknowledgement that there are examples where we saw it with Hiro Kanu, we saw it with Justice Terry, where Texas is going to make it really hard for somebody to choose someone other than Texas. And I don't need to say, oh, it's NIL, they dropped the bag, it's money's all everyone cares about. Like, look, I get it. I'm not naive. I get money matters. Money matters to anybody that works in any kind of professional role. Money matters. I also want to acknowledge that, like, Texas, I just brought this up on our board because I was having a debate about whether Texas is actually a prestigious football program because they haven't won a national championship in 20 years. And it's an outrageous concept. I would think Georgia fans in particular would know better because of all of the 1980 comments that happened year after year after year until they win in 2021. And Georgia was still signing 5 stars. Georgia was still finding ways to win big recruitments. Now it was a different era of recruiting, and the things that were being used to win those recruitments were different. I'm not suggesting that they're not, but you don't just drop a bag at the end and get a recruit because of the bag. You have to have other substance to your program. And Texas does. I mean, they're a big brand. They've got a great offensive play calling head coach. They've been to 2 straight college football semifinals. Now, would Hiro Kanu have been at Texas and not somewhere else? Not in the NIL era? Probably not. Like, let's just call it like it is. Like, chances are what they were able to provide for him made it impossible for him to choose anywhere else. So for that reason, the Texas bag is going up, but also me trying to kill another narrative where we just complain about NIL and money every single time someone commits somewhere that's not Georgia, when Georgia's signing the number 2 recruiting class in the country. I also want the arrow pointing up on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where when you look at recruiting, it's so easy as a fan to fixate more on the guys you didn't get compared to the guys you did. And I was trying to look up the quote from Bill Self that to me sums up what's wrong with, and this is not Georgia specific, it's a lot of fans, winning is a relief and losing is a disaster, where it's like you don't even really enjoy the recruiting wins. You're just ready for when things don't go your way. And that's just the nature of it. And yeah, I think it's kind of ridiculous to talk about Texas not being one of those premier programs, or one that 2 seasons ago, were on the verge of playing for the national title. And Michael Penix Jr., the savior of the Atlanta Falcons, goes down and helps Washington, retake that lead to win in the semifinals. And they had a good season this year as well. So it's one of those things. We love the folks on the Junkyard, and sometimes logic and reason isn't always super strong, but it's just part of following recruiting. There's going to be battles you don't win. I do appreciate, Ben, that the concept for all teams, when a guy signs or commits to your team, it's because he's doing it for the right reasons. And when he picks another team, he just didn't have his head on straight. He was just chasing that bag.
Yeah. Now don't let y'all think that means that Jordan and I are too ignorant or naive to all of this to understand. Like, NIL is a part of this thing. There's a reason why Texas is able to get guys that other schools are not able to get. That's not when they created the rules and everyone started operating in this wild, wild west world. There are certain brands that have more staying power than others, and Texas is absolutely one of them. But I really call that out to say, like, Georgia went all in. They tried. I think that there were some compelling reasons why they thought they might be able to get Hiro Kanu. But again, Texas was able to just pull that one out. You sort of segued me into my final arrow pointing up by saying the savior of the Atlanta Falcons. I don't know if that exists or not. I don't know if that's a real thing, but my final arrow pointing up is Kip Adams' tears. Our good friend Kip Adams, one of the bigger Falcons fans that I know, wears it on his sleeve when they do things right, which is rare, and do things wrong, which is very common. But I think there's going to be a lot of this, not just from Kip, but everyone. The Eagles play in the Super Bowl coming up, and you're going to see Jalen Carter. You're going to see Nolan Smith. You're going to see Keely Ringo, Lewis Seen, Jordan Davis. Nakobe Dean's not playing right now, but I mean, they are loaded with Georgia 2021 defensive players on that Eagles roster. I mean, I don't know if there is a quota on people saying, oh, the Falcons passed on this guy, the Falcons passed on that guy, but whatever there is going to be a lot of that over the next week and a half. Yeah,
as a Falcons fan, albeit somewhat removed, I mean, I people ask me about the Falcons sometimes. 28-3, like I just get numb to them doing stuff after that Super Bowl. The one that hurts me as a Falcons fan was Nakobe Dean, because he was on the board for so long, and you got Troy Anderson from Montana State, who I've enjoyed what I've seen from him, but he can't seem to stay healthy. So it hurts, and just get ready for them to pass on somebody again in April, and we'll probably set Kip up to let loose and go on another rant.
Yeah, no, I mean, I feel for Kip because I know he wears it. I mean, we're both Falcons fans, but I feel like I can separate myself from like, I don't want to call myself a fair weather Falcons fan, but it's like when they're struggling, it doesn't hurt me, but when they're doing well, I will be invested into it. So I don't know how you would describe that, but
I was just going to say, for me watching it now, it's almost like if you went to YouTube and just watch like car crash compilations where it's just like, oh, wow. Oh, that looks rough. Like, it's not even, I don't get mad. I'm just like, oh, well, that was wild.
Yeah. All right, this is a segment that I think we're going to really love. Like when we look at the end of the year, I think this is going to look great as well. And I know that folks liked it from the first one, but we're doing this segment, Predict to Commit, where we, again, predict. So Jordan's showing you right here if you're watching on YouTube. Last episode, I picked Graham Houston, offensive tackle from Buford. He picks the running back from Chaminade Madonna Prep in Florida, Derek Cooper, who will be on campus this upcoming weekend. I'm against my better judgment, Jordan. I'm actually going to let you predict to commit first. So go ahead.
What a nice guy. And if you're watching this live, if you're watching on YouTube, we've got, and if you're listening to the podcast too, we've got a graphic pulled up with Graham Houston, with Derek Cooper. I'm going to have this graphic running, and it's kind of going to look more like a list the farther we go. We're going to add people to it so we can easily keep up with which recruits Ben picked and which one I picked to see how we do as this 2026 class comes together. Ben, I'm going to keep this really simple. It's a guy that we talked about earlier on in this podcast, and my next predict to commit is Tyler Atkinson, linebacker there from Grayson High School. He's a guy that it seems like there was a stretch there for 2 or 3 years where I would look at Georgia's linebacker class, the one that it signed, and I say, man, they signed 2 guys, 3 guys, and there's no way they're going to be able to get these top linebackers the next year. And then they keep doing it. And you look at the 2025 class, getting Zayden Walker, getting Anthony Crua, that's no cause for alarm for me. Tyler Atkinson, I think, is a guy that Glenn Schumann and Kirby Smart have had a relationship with for quite a while. I think that they understand he's going to be a priority, that he's one of the top players. Looking at the 24/7 ratings, he is the number 2 linebacker in the 2026 cycle, the number 18 overall player in the 2026 class. I think that Georgia understands that it's going to be a fight, that there's going to be a lot of teams vying to convince him to leave the state, to go play elsewhere. But I'm going to say Tyler Atkins winds up playing for the Georgia Bulldogs. Glenn Schumann gets another huge gem and gets a guy that I think is going to continue what's been just an absurd run of talent at the linebacker position.
I like that pick a lot. You're going to make a lot of people happy with that one. You're star chasing a little bit. You got Derek Cooper. You got Tyler Atkinson, a couple top 30 guys. Like, you are calling your shots early. I am curious. I know we talked about this offline, but what are your thoughts on for future episodes, whether we take guys that have already been taken? Like, do you think Tyler Atkinson should still be on the board for me, or should he be removed altogether? I'm cool either way.
I kind of think we need to remove them. I think you get to claim them, especially as many kids are going to wind up signing, 26, 27, 28. I think we'll be okay if we have to venture a little. And Ben, I don't want to let our listeners and our viewers down, but we're going to be wrong some. So there will be room for us to pick some guys that wind up not coming to Georgia. But no, I am okay. We are doing this live. Call a truce. If you pick somebody, that's your guy, and the other guy can't pick him.
Oh, yeah, let's call a truce right after you take Georgia's biggest target off the board. No, I agree with you. I the more I thought about it, I was like, we had said that we could pick different guys in different weeks, but the more that I thought about it, it's like, I want you to have Tyler Atkinson, and I just don't get Tyler Atkinson anymore, which I think that's a great pick, Jordan. I got to say, I think that's a great pick.
I appreciate that, and you got to throw me a bone, Ben, because you're the recruiting guy. I'm kind of playing with one hand tied behind my back. You're the one with the intel. I'm just trying to follow the little crumbs that you drop over on dogs247.com, which is why the folks listening and watching should subscribe.
No, Jordan, I'm just like you. I'm flying by the seat of my pants. I'm taking guesses just like you are. With that said, my predicted commit for the week is a guy that we have not talked a whole lot about. But it's a name that he has an official visit scheduled to Georgia. I want to say June 13th to 15th. Someone that Georgia has gone to see during this viewing period, someone that I know that they like a lot, and that is IMG Academy safety Zach Fort. 5'10", 190 pounds, could probably play any of the safety spots, whether that be deep safety or nickel. I really like this guy. I got to know him a little bit down at the Future 50 that was actually at IMG where he's playing, and someone that I just think very, very highly of. So going out on a limb a little bit with this one, because he's not someone that we've talked about a whole lot, but I'm trying to get ahead of you, maybe pick some out of the blue, outside the box type of players, while you take Tyler Atkinson and Derek Cooper right off my board. Jordan muted himself, guys. We were about to run a 5-star show here. We were about to have a 5-star show, and Jordan mutes himself.
It's the line between good and great. It's very thin. And no, I like the pick of Zach Fort. I think it's a guy that you've talked quite a bit about defensive backs in this cycle, and Georgia trying to add to that room, and those guys being high priorities guys are going after. And, I like the pick a lot. I'll be interested to see how this plays out with Fort.
No doubt. All right. Well, another great show. Typically after this is where I would fit a rant in. I don't really have a whole lot to rant about right now. Everyone's been pretty good. I kind of got my Texas debate that I was having right before on the show in. So I feel like that satisfied any, ranting that I needed to do. So we'll save that for another episode. Like I mentioned, next week we will have a show breaking down the junior day, also talking with Andrew Ivins about the 2025 class, maybe looking a little ahead to 2026, probably talking about some historical stuff as well, where he had guys ranked in the past, some of his hits, some of his misses. I think it has an opportunity to be a really, really fun interview. As always, go subscribe to Dogs 24/7 if you're not already. If you're on here, like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, like or subscribe to in any of those capacities that you're able to do there. We really appreciate all of the feedback that we've gotten already, and all the feedback that I know that we're going to get from this episode and future ones as well. So with that, I'm your host, Benjamin Wolk. I've got Jordan Hill with me. This was our second edition of the Stay Wolk UGA recruiting show, and we will see you next time.